Earlier we created frequency charts from a distribution of continuous data, and now we're going to use that to draw a histogram. Imagine that this data represented the length of a stay for any given patient at an extended care hospital. Now we have all these data, the number of days that they stayed and how many people stayed roughly that number of days. So in order to create our histogram, we're going to first take all of our bins, and what we're going to do is not write the 70 to 80, the 80 to 90, and so forth. We're just going to put the edge of the bins. So if we say that the edge of this bin is about 70, and then this one's about 80, this one's about 90, about 100, and so forth, those are the numbers that we're going to write down here on the horizontal axis. So we split at 70, we split at 80, we split at 90, and so forth. So we write all those numbers down on our horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, we do our frequency. So our highest frequency is 14, it looks like. So we would number such that we would get up to 14 on the vertical axis. If we were to label these before we go on, our label down here is going to be number of days, and our label over here on the left is going to be the frequency or the number of patients that come in. So we want to make sure we keep our labels straight, because otherwise this can get very confusing very quickly. So we put that in. Now what we need to do is draw the bars. It's very similar to a bar graph, except we're going to do it a little bit differently. Instead of drawing its own little separate bars for everything like we would with a bar graph, we're going to instead have bars that touch each other and start at the edge and go to the edge of the next one and go the proper height. So the first one, frequency of 1, would go about here. The 80 to 90, you start at the 80 and go up to 4, that's the frequency, and then go down to 90. Here, 90 to 100 is 7, so you'd start at 90. So a little bit of a bad line there. Go over and go down to 100. And what you're trying to do is all the bars are always touching, and you're basically creating a continuous graph. So let's show the cleaned up version now. You have the bar with a height of 1 from 70 to 80, bar from 80 to 90, height of 4, height of 7, and so forth, all the way through the table. And what this shows now is a very clear picture of where the typical number of days are, and you can actually see there's a peak here and then a second peak here. So it looks like there's some different things going on that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell just from that big long list of numbers that we had earlier. So this is called a histogram. Last thing we do, of course, is give it a final title, patient length of stays. Now, if you wanted to label a histogram a little bit differently, let's say with relative frequency, you could use the relative frequency column of the chart we created earlier. Otherwise, everything else is fundamentally the same. We still have our 70, 80, 80 to 90, all the way up to 180. We still have our frequency on this axis, except this time it's going to be relative frequency. We still give it a title. Now we have our relative frequency chart, which looks very similar to the frequency chart. The shape and everything is exactly the same, as you'll see when you compare these two. The only real difference is how you label your vertical axis. So it doesn't really matter if you're creating a frequency-based histogram or relative frequency-based histogram. It's going to give you effectively the same result.